There is a particular, suffocating kind of silence that falls over a Manhattan penthouse when a marriage dies. For Celine, it wasn't marked by shattered glass or screaming matches. It was the quiet, lethal scratching of a Mont Blanc pen on a ruthless divorce settlement. She walked out of the Smith Tower on a freezing November afternoon, with nothing but a scuffed leather suitcase and the clothes on her back, the faint, mocking laughter of her husband's new mistress echoing in the marble foyer. They thought they had successfully buried a penniless nobody. They had no idea that the quiet woman they just threw into the gutter was about to inherit the very city they stood on. The rain in New York City never feels clean, but on the day Celine's life ended, it felt like absolute acid. Standing in the grand foyer of the $18 million Upper East Side penthouse she had called home for 5 years, Celine stared at the document on the glass table. Beside it sat Dominic Smith. 5 years ago, Dominic had been the charming, albeit ruthless heir to Smith Enterprises. He had swept Celine, a seemingly ordinary bookstore manager with a quiet demeanor, off her feet. He had promised her the world. Now, his sharp jaw was set in a line of complete indifference, his tailored Tom Ford suit completely unwrinkled by the destruction of his vows. "Sign it, Celine," Dominic said, checking his Rolex. "My legal team has been more than generous. You're getting the checking account balance, which should be enough to cover a deposit on a modest apartment in Brooklyn or Queens. We both know the prenuptial agreement is ironclad." "Generous?" Celine's voice was a fragile whisper, hoarse from days of crying. "You moved her into the guest room, Dominic, while I was still living here." From the arched doorway of the formal dining room, a sleek, statuesque woman leaned against the frame. Sylvia Carmichael. Sylvia was old money, a socialite with a trust fund, and a smile that looked like it belonged on a predator. She swirled a glass of Pinot Noir, looking at Celine with a mixture of pity and intense boredom. "Oh, Celine, don't make this a tragedy," Sylvia purred, taking a sip. "Dominic and I are a match made in the boardroom. You were a charity case. A lovely little phase. But Smith Enterprises needs a merger with the Carmichael family to survive the upcoming fiscal quarter. You understand business, don't you? Oh, wait. No, you don't." Celine looked away from Sylvia's blinding, malicious smile and turned to the other woman in the room, Beatrice Smith, Dominic's mother. Beatrice sat in a wing-back chair, clutching her pearls, her eyes narrowed like a hawk inspecting a particularly unappetizing rodent. "If you are quite finished being theatrical," Beatrice snapped, her tone dripping with old-world Manhattan elitism, "I would like you out before the cleaning staff arrives. We need to fumigate the master suite. Heaven knows what kind of cheap department store scent has seeped into the upholstery." The cruelty was suffocating. For 5 years, Celine had endured Beatrice's sneers, Dominic's late-night absences, and the constant, grinding reminder that she was less than. She had endured it because she truly loved Dominic. But the Dominic she loved had been a facade, a mask he wore until she signed the prenup on their wedding day, a document that ensured if they divorced, she would leave with exactly what she brought into the marriage: nothing. With a trembling hand, Celine picked up the pen. She didn't read the fine print. She already knew her lawyer, a cheap, court-appointed attorney she had to beg to look at her case, had told her fighting the Smith family's legal armada was financial suicide. She signed her name, Celine Hayes. "Excellent," Dominic said, instantly snatching the paper. He didn't even look her in the eye. "Leave the keys on the console." Celine picked up her single suitcase. It contained 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of jeans, some basic toiletries, and a small wooden box her mother had given her before passing away. Beatrice actually stepped forward and unceremoniously unzipped the front pocket of the suitcase, peering inside to ensure Celine hadn't stolen any silver or jewelry. "Clean," Beatrice announced to her son, waving her hand dismissively. "Show her the service elevator, Dominic. I don't want her running into the residence in the main lobby." 10 minutes later, Celine was standing on the wet pavement of Park Avenue, the heavy service doors slammed shut behind her, the metallic thud finalizing her expulsion from the elite world. She had $85 in her purse. She had no job, no home, and a heart so thoroughly shattered she wasn't sure it would ever beat normally again. She looked up through the freezing rain at the penthouse, a glowing beacon of wealth in the grey sky. She didn't cry. The tears had completely dried up, replaced by a cold, hollow void in her chest. Pulling up her coat collar, Celine gripped her suitcase and walked toward the subway. The following 3 weeks were a masterclass in survival. Celine rented a windowless, damp room in a run-down motel in Flushing, Queens. She ate instant ramen and spent her days at the local public library, desperately applying for minimum wage jobs. The few friends she thought she had in Manhattan had immediately blocked her number. In their world, a divorced, penniless woman was a social contagion. One evening, staring at the peeling wallpaper of her motel room, Celine's eyes landed on the small wooden box her mother, Lillian, had given her on her deathbed 10 years ago. "Celine," her mother had whispered, her hands frail and shaking. "I ran away from a very dark, very powerful world to raise you in peace. If you are ever truly lost, if you ever find yourself completely alone, with nothing left to lose, open the box. But only then." Celine had always assumed it was sentimental. A few family photos, perhaps a small life insurance policy. But she was truly alone now. She had nothing left to lose. Her fingers trembled as she pried the old brass latch open. Inside there were no photos. There was only a heavy iron key with a sequence of numbers engraved on it, and a sealed envelope bearing the logo of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm, Pendleton and Vance Fiduciary. Wait, I must not use Vance. Let's correct that in her mind. Pendleton and Croft Fiduciary, located in the heart of the financial district. The next morning, Celine spent her last subway fare to get to Wall Street. The building was an imposing structure of black marble and tinted glass. She walked in, feeling entirely out of place in her thrift store trench coat and scuffed boots, surrounded by men in bespoke suits. When she approached the mahogany reception desk and presented the key and the letter, the receptionist's condescending smile vanished instantly. She paled, picked up a heavy desk phone, and whispered urgently into the receiver. Less than 2 minutes later, a set of double doors flew open. An elderly man with silver hair, a sharp 3-piece suit, and a cane hurried out. He looked at Celine, his eyes wide, studying her face with an intensity that made her step back. "My God," the man breathed. "You have her eyes. You have Lillian's eyes." I'm Celine Hayes," she stammered. "I know exactly who you are, Miss Hayes," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I am Arthur Pendleton, senior partner. I have been waiting for you to walk through those doors for 10 years. Please come with me." Arthur led her into a massive corner office overlooking the East River. He locked the door behind them and gestured for her to sit on a plush leather sofa. He poured 2 glasses of water, his hands shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. "Your mother, Lillian, was not just Lillian Hayes," Arthur began, sitting across from her. "Her maiden name was Lillian Hale. Does that mean anything to you?" Celine frowned, searching her memory. "Hale? Like Hale Industries? The tech and shipping conglomerate?" "Exactly," Arthur said softly. "Your grandfather was Reginald Hale, the founder. When your mother chose to marry a struggling jazz musician, your father, Reginald, disowned her. He was a ruthless man, Celine. He cut her off completely. But on his deathbed, 12 years ago, regret finally consumed him. He realized his empire was meaningless without his bloodline." Arthur slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. Reginald rewrote his will. He bypassed his greedy nephews and board members. He left the entirety of his controlling shares in Hale Industries, his global real estate portfolio, and his liquid assets in a blind trust. The condition was that it could only be unlocked by you, his only granddaughter. when you presented the key your mother held." Celine stared at the portfolio, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Arthur, what exactly are you saying?" "I am saying, Celine," Arthur leaned forward, his voice steady and grave, "that as of this moment, you are the sole inheritor of the Hale estate. You are the majority shareholder of a multinational empire. Your current net worth, once these documents are signed, is estimated at $14.6 billion. The room seemed to spin. 14 billion. Dominic Smith, who had thrown her out like garbage because she was poor, had a family net worth of barely 2 billion. Sylvia Carmichael's old money was practically pocket change in comparison. "They threw me away," Celine whispered, tears of shock finally spilling over her lashes. "Dominic, he threw me out in the rain for nothing." Arthur's eyes hardened. He had already run a background check the moment the receptionist called him. He knew exactly what the Smiths had done to her. "Miss Hale," Arthur said, intentionally using her rightful name. "The Smith family relies on loans and leverage. They are currently seeking a major capital injection to survive. You walked into this building as a victim. If you choose to sign these papers, you walk out as their executioner. The question is, what do you want to do?" Celine looked at the pen Arthur offered her. It was a Mont Blanc, exactly like the one Dominic had forced her to use. She reached out, her hand no longer trembling. The mousy, terrified Celine Hayes died in that chair. "I want everything," Celine said, her voice dropping an octave, cold and resolute, "and I want them to have nothing." The transformation of Celine Hale did not happen overnight. It was a meticulous, grueling process forged in absolute secrecy. For the next 12 months, Celine completely vanished from the United States. Under Arthur's fierce guidance, she relocated to a private estate in the Swiss Alps. She wasn't there to relax. She was there for war. She spent 18 hours a day learning the intricacies of global finance, corporate mergers, hostile takeovers, and the specific vulnerabilities of the New York real estate market. She was tutored by retired CEOs, ruthless hedge fund managers, and media consultants. Physically, the toll of her miserable marriage washed away. The stress-induced pallor was replaced by a sharp, commanding vitality. She traded her thrift store clothes for bespoke Armani suits and tailored Givenchy dresses. Her hair, once kept long and unstyled to appease Dominic's conservative tastes, was cut into a sleek, razor-sharp bob that framed her high cheekbones she inherited directly from Reginald Hale. Meanwhile, back in New York, the Smith-Carmichael merger was cracking under pressure. Dominic and Sylvia had married in a lavish, highly publicized ceremony in the Hamptons. But behind the glossy magazine covers, Smith Enterprises was bleeding money. The commercial real estate market had taken a severe dip, and Dominic's aggressive over-leveraging was catching up to him. Sylvia's family, realizing the Smiths were a sinking ship, refused to pour more cash into Dominic's failing projects. In his glass-walled boardroom, Dominic slammed his fist on the table, glaring at his CFO. "What do you mean the banks are calling in the loans? We have the Hudson Yards project. It's a gold mine." "It's a money pit, Dominic," his CFO replied nervously, sweating through his shirt. "We need a cash injection of at least $500 million by the end of the quarter, or we file for Chapter 11. The only entity with that kind of liquid capital willing to invest in distressed real estate right now is the Hale Investment Group." Dominic's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Hale Investment Group, the mysterious, notoriously private conglomerate that had recently been making aggressive moves in the European markets. Word on Wall Street was that the reclusive heir had finally taken the reins. "Get me a meeting with the CEO of Hale," Dominic ordered, straightening his tie. "I don't care what it takes. Bribe their assistants. Leverage our contacts. We get Hale to back us, and we own the city." What Dominic didn't know was that the CEO of Hale Investment Group was already looking at him. Thousands of miles away, in a sleek London office, Celine stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time stock drops for Smith Enterprises. Arthur Pendleton stood beside her, holding a tablet. "They've taken the bait, Celine," Arthur said, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Dominic Smith has requested an emergency pitch meeting. He's asking for $600 million in exchange for a 30% equity stake in Smith Enterprises." Celine took a sip of her black coffee. "Deny the 30%. Tell his people we want 51%, a controlling stake, and tell him the CEO of Hale will only negotiate in person at the Smith Annual Gala next week." Arthur chuckled. "He'll balk at 51%. It means surrendering his company." "He won't balk. He's drowning," Celine replied, her voice smooth and devoid of mercy. "He'll agree to the meeting, because his arrogance tells him he can charm the mysterious Hale heir into a better deal once they are face to face. Let him plan his little gala. Let him invite the press, the elite, and his awful mother." Celine turned away from the monitors, her reflection caught in the dark glass of the window. The woman staring back at her was a stranger to the girl who had cried in the rain a year ago. She was armored in wealth, intellect, and an icy resolve. "Book my jet, Arthur," Celine said, stepping towards the door. "It's time to go home. I have a party to crash." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds, clinking crystal, and suffocating anxiety. To the casual observer, the Smith Enterprises annual gala was a triumph, a dazzling display of New York's upper crust, dripping in wealth and false sincerity. But to the financial sharks circling the room, it was a beautifully decorated wake. Dominic Smith stood near the ice sculpture, tugging at the collar of his Brioni tuxedo. He was sweating. Beside him, Sylvia Carmichael was holding court, draped in a heavy, ostentatious Oscar de la Renta gown that looked more like armor than silk. She laughed at a joke made by a city councilman, but her eyes were darting nervously toward the entrance. "Where are they, Dominic?" Sylvia hissed through a painted smile, turning away from the councilman. "You said the Hale representatives would be here by 9. It's 9:40. My father is threatening to leave, and if he walks out, the rest of the board follows." "They'll be here," Dominic snapped, downing his scotch. "Arthur Pendleton personally confirmed the CEO's attendance. We just have to keep the press occupied until the ink is dry on the preliminary agreement." A few feet away, Beatrice Smith sat on a velvet settee, critiquing the hors d'oeuvres and glaring at anyone whose net worth was under 9 figures. She looked completely oblivious to the fact that her son was hours away from defaulting on $500 million in loans held by Chase and Goldman Sachs. At exactly 9:45, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The heavy gilded double doors of the ballroom swung open. 4 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits stepped into the room, their earpieces instantly marking them as elite private security. The ambient chatter of 300 socialites died in a matter of seconds, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Arthur Pendleton walked in next, leaning heavily on his silver-tipped cane, his gaze sweeping the room with aristocratic disdain. He stepped aside, making way for the guest of honor. Dominic took a step forward, his hand extended, ready to deploy his most lethal, charming smile to the Hale CEO. The smile froze, then slowly contorted into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. A woman stepped through the doors. She wasn't wearing a ball gown. She wore a fiercely tailored, emerald-green Tom Ford tuxedo that fit her like a second skin, paired with razor-sharp stilettos that clicked against the marble floor like the ticking of a time bomb. Her dark hair was cut into a sleek, symmetrical bob, and at her throat rested a diamond collar that caught the light with blinding intensity. It was Celine, but it wasn't the Celine they knew. The timid, exhausted woman with the thrift store coats and apologetic eyes had been entirely eradicated. The woman walking towards the center of the ballroom radiated absolute, terrifying authority. Beatrice Smith dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. What is this?" Sylvia whispered, her fingers digging painfully into Dominic's arm. "Dominic, isn't that—" Dominic couldn't speak. His brain was misfiring. desperately trying to reconcile the penniless ex-wife he had thrown into the freezing rain with the billionaire titan currently parting the crowd like the Red Sea. He stumbled forward, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and profound confusion. "Celine?" Dominic's voice cracked. He looked at Arthur Pendleton, then back at her. "What the hell kind of stunt is this? How did you get in here? Security?" Celine stopped 3 feet from him. She didn't flinch. She didn't look angry. She looked utterly, devastatingly bored. "Good evening, Dominic," Celine said, her voice smooth, amplified slightly by the perfect acoustics of the ballroom. "I heard you were looking for a lifeline. I must say the catering has improved since I last lived in your sphere, though the company remains predictably desperate." "Security!" Beatrice shrieked, staggering to her feet, her pearls rattling. "Get this filthy gold-digging tramp out of my sight. She must have slept her way into Arthur Pendleton's office. Have her arrested for trespassing." 2 Plaza security guards stepped forward hesitantly, but Arthur's private detail instantly blocked them, their hands resting subtly near their lapels. Arthur stepped up beside Celine, his expression turning to stone. "Madam Smith, I would advise you to lower your voice before you bankrupt your family entirely. You are addressing the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of the Hale Investment Group." The collective gasp from the ballroom sucked the oxygen out of the air. Flashbulbs from the society photographers by the door suddenly erupted, blindingly fast. Celine Hayes was the Hale heiress. Sylvia took a stumbling step backward, the colour draining from her face until she looked like a wax figure. No, that's impossible. She was a nobody. She didn't have a dime." "My mother, Lillian Hale, preferred the quiet life," Celine said seamlessly, finally turning her dark, predatory gaze to Sylvia. "She gave up her fortune to avoid toxic, pathetic parasites like you, Sylvia. But I am not my mother, and I have a much higher tolerance for getting my hands dirty." Dominic's chest heaved. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The $600 million lifeline he needed to save his empire, his legacy, and his freedom. It was all sitting in the palm of the woman he had discarded like trash. "Celine," Dominic stammered, his arrogance instantly evaporating into a sickening, sycophantic panic. "Celine, please, let's go to the VIP suite. We can talk about this. Privately. We were married for 5 years. There's a foundation there." Celine looked him up and down, a slow, chilling smile curving her lips. "Lead the way, Dominic. Let's talk about our foundation." The VIP suite, overlooking Central Park, was suffocatingly quiet. The heavy soundproof doors had sealed out the chaos of the ballroom below. Inside, Celine sat behind a massive mahogany desk, casually inspecting her perfectly manicured nails. Arthur stood by the window, briefcase in hand. Dominic, Sylvia, and Beatrice stood on the other side of the desk, looking like a lineup of condemned prisoners facing a firing squad. "Sit," Celine commanded, pointing to the 2 leather chairs across from her. Dominic and Sylvia sat. Beatrice refused, standing stubbornly with her arms crossed, though her hands were visibly trembling. "Let's skip the apologies and the pathetic attempts to remind me of our love, Dominic," Celine began, leaning forward, steepling her fingers. "Arthur, the dossier." Arthur placed a thick, black folder on the desk. Celine flipped it open. "You requested a $600 million capital injection for a 30% stake in Smith Enterprises," Celine read, not looking up. "You need it to cover the massive, gaping hole in your Hudson Yards development and to pay off the interest on your bridge loans from Chase." "Yes," Dominic swallowed hard. "Celine, I admit I made mistakes. But the company is fundamentally sound. With your backing, Hale Investments will triple its return in 5 years. We can be partners." "Partners," Celine repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. "Dominic, you seem to misunderstand the nature of this meeting. I didn't come here to invest in your company." She slid a document across the polished wood. "I came to collect your debt." Dominic frowned, picking up the paper. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, and as he read, a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. His hands began to shake violently. What is this?" Sylvia demanded, leaning over to look. "For the past 6 months," Celine explained smoothly, "the Hale Investment Group has been quietly purchasing your debt. Chase Bank, Goldman Sachs, even the private equity firms you went begging to in December. We bought it all at a premium. Every single note, every single loan that Smith Enterprises owes." She paused, letting the silence crush him. "You owe the Hale Group $840 million, Dominic, and as of midnight tonight, you are in breach of covenant. The loans are callable, immediately." "You can't do this!" Beatrice screamed, slamming her hands on the desk. "This is illegal. This is a vendetta." "It's business, Beatrice," Celine said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Something you claim I know nothing about." Dominic dropped the paper, looking at Celine with wide, terrified eyes. "If you call in those loans, Smith Enterprises goes into immediate bankruptcy. The courts will liquidate everything. We'll lose the company. We'll lose the penthouse." "You'll lose the clothes on your back if I choose to pierce the corporate veil and go after your personal assets, which I am fully prepared to do," Celine confirmed. Sylvia stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. She looked at Dominic, her face twisted in disgust. "You're bankrupt. You told my father the cash flow problem was temporary. You lied to us." "Sylvia, please," Dominic begged, reaching for her hand. "The Carmichael Trust can cover this. If your father guarantees the loan—" "Are you insane?" Sylvia spat, jerking her hand away as if he were diseased. "My family isn't sinking $1 billion into your failure. This is over, Dominic. We're done. I'm filing for an annulment tomorrow." She turned to Celine, attempting a desperate, placating smile. "Celine, Miss Hale, this is his mess. The Carmichaels have nothing to do with this. Get out, Sylvia," Celine said, not even looking at her. "You backed a losing horse. Run back to Daddy before the press outside figures out you're married to a pauper." Sylvia didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her designer clutch and practically sprinted out of the VIP suite, slamming the door behind her. Dominic buried his face in his hands. The empire he had built on deceit, the legacy his family had lorded over Celine for 5 years, was burning to ash in a matter of minutes. "There is an alternative," Celine said quietly. Dominic looked up, a pathetic spark of hope in his eyes. Arthur stepped forward and placed a single piece of paper on the desk. Next to it, he carefully laid down a Mont Blanc pen. It was the exact same model Dominic had given Celine on the day he kicked her out. "Sign over your 51% controlling shares of Smith Enterprises directly to me," Celine instructed. "I assume total control of the board, the assets, and the subsidiaries. In exchange, I will restructure the debt, and you will not face personal bankruptcy. You get to walk away with the checking account balance, which, if I recall, is enough to cover a deposit on a modest apartment in Brooklyn or Queens." Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. "You are stealing our legacy. You are a monster." "I am the architect of your consequences," Celine corrected softly. She looked directly into Dominic's shattered eyes. "Sign it, Dominic. My legal team has been more than generous. We both know you have no other choice." "No, so," Dominic stared at the Mont Blanc pen. The irony was suffocating. He picked it up, his hand trembling so badly he could barely form the letters. He signed his name, officially signing away his family's empire to the woman he had treated like dirt. Celine took the paper, inspecting the signature with cold satisfaction. "Leave the keys to the penthouse on the desk," Celine said, echoing his exact words from a year ago. "I want you both out by morning. I need to fumigate." The morning sun rising over Manhattan usually painted the Smith penthouse in warm, golden, forgiving hues. But on this particular Tuesday, the light that sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt stark, clinical, and completely unforgiving. At exactly 6:45 a.m., a fleet of 4 matte black SUVs pulled up to the curb outside the Smith Tower. The doorman, who for 5 years had looked right through Celine as if she were made of glass, practically tripped over his own feet to open the double glass doors. He recognized the man leading the procession from the front page of the Wall Street Journal that had hit the newsstands just an hour prior. Arthur Pendleton stepped into the lobby, his silver-tipped cane clicking rhythmically against the Italian marble. Behind him walked a team of 8 private security contractors, wearing discreet Hale Investment Group lapel pins, led by a broad-shouldered man named Garrison Locke. 2 forensic accountants followed closely behind, carrying thick leather briefcases filled with court-ordered asset seizure injunctions. "Good morning, sir," the concierge stammered, his face pale. May I announce you to the penthouse?" "That won't be necessary," Arthur said smoothly, not breaking his stride. "We own the building now. Deactivate the penthouse's private security overrides and lock down the elevators. No one goes up or down without my explicit authorization." The ride to the top floor was conducted in absolute silence. When the polished brass doors of the private elevator slid open, they revealed a scene of pure, unfiltered chaos. The pristine, suffocatingly quiet home Celine had once tiptoed through was currently a war zone of shattered egos and frantic packing. In the center of the grand foyer, surrounded by a mountain of wildly overstuffed Louis Vuitton trunks, stood Beatrice Smith. She was still wearing a silk dressing gown, her hair in rollers, screaming at the top of her lungs at the head housekeeper, Maria. "Careful with that Chagall, you clumsy idiot," Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at a massive canvas leaning against the wall. "Wrap it in the velvet blankets from the guest room, and bring me the velvet-lined safe boxes for the Cartier collection." Maria, however, did not move. She simply stood by the archway, her arms crossed. At midnight, Celine's team had contacted the entire domestic staff of the Smith household, offering them immediate employment under the Hale Group at triple their current salaries, with full benefits, provided they did not assist the Smiths in removing any assets from the premises. "Did you not hear me?" Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest in dramatic outrage. "She heard you perfectly, Madam Smith." Arthur's voice cut through the foyer like a whip. Beatrice whipped around, her eyes widening in horror as the security team fanned out, securing the exits and blocking the hallways. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot barge into my home. My son is on the phone with his lawyers." "This is no longer your home," Arthur stated, gesturing for one of the accountants to step forward. "As of 4 a.m., a federal judge approved the emergency seizure of all Smith personal and corporate assets to satisfy the $840 million debt you owe the Hale Investment Group. That includes the Chagall, the Cartier, the furniture, and the silk robe you are currently wearing, though we will generously allow you to keep the latter." "You are stealing from us," Beatrice sobbed, launching herself toward one of the trunks, desperately trying to pry it open to retrieve a diamond necklace. Garrison Locke effortlessly stepped in her path, blocking her with the sheer mass of his body. "I am a daughter of the American Revolution. I am on the board of the Metropolitan Museum. I demand to speak to Celine. She wouldn't do this to her own mother-in-law." Arthur let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Your board memberships were unilaterally revoked at 6 o'clock this morning, Beatrice. The charities realized your pledged contributions were heavily leveraged against company assets you no longer possess. As for Celine, she specifically requested that you be shown the exact same courtesy you showed her." Arthur pointed his cane toward the far end of the hallway. "Garrison, escort Madam Smith to the service elevator. I believe she once referred to it as the freight elevator. Ensure she takes nothing but the clothes on her back and one standard-sized suitcase." While Beatrice's wails echoed down the corridor, Arthur bypassed the foyer and walked towards the glass-walled study at the end of the penthouse. Inside, Dominic Smith was a portrait of a man drowning. His Tom Ford tuxedo shirt from the night before was unbuttoned, his bow tie hanging loosely around his neck, his hair disheveled. He was gripping his cell phone so tightly his knuckles were white. "Harrison, please, you have to authorize a bridge loan," Dominic begged into the receiver. pacing frantically behind his massive oak desk. "Just 50 million. It will keep the SEC off my back until I can liquidate the offshore accounts. Harrison? Harrison." Dominic pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen. The call had been disconnected. He cursed violently, throwing the device across the room where it shattered against the tempered glass wall. "The rats are fleeing the sinking ship, I see," Arthur remarked, stepping into the study and closing the door behind him. Dominic spun around, his eyes bloodshot and wide, with a cornered, feral panic. "Pendleton, you think you've won? You think that bitch has won? I built this empire. Smith Enterprises is nothing without my network." "Your network hung up on you exactly 40 seconds ago," Arthur corrected, leaning comfortably on his cane. "I have leverage," Dominic spat, scrambling toward his desk and violently yanking open the bottom drawer. He pulled out a sleek, black encrypted hard drive and slammed it onto the mahogany surface. "I spent the last 4 hours downloading the proprietary algorithmic blueprints for the Hudson Yards infrastructure, along with the unredacted client ledgers. I have a meeting with Silas Kensington at 8 o'clock. The Kensington Group will pay me 50 million in untraceable offshore funds for these files. Hale Investments will lose its entire competitive edge before Celine even officially takes the CEO chair." Dominic smiled, a desperate, ugly sneer. "Tell my ex-wife she should have completely locked me out of the local servers before she went to sleep." Arthur didn't blink. The deep, condescending smile that crept across his weathered face was chilling. "Ah, yes, the Kensington Group," Arthur mused. He reached into his tailored breast pocket, pulled out his own smartphone, tapped a single contact, and placed the phone on the center of the desk on speakerphone. The line rang twice, before a booming, aristocratic voice filled the quiet study. "Arthur? Is it done?" It was Silas Kensington himself. "Good morning, Silas," Arthur replied comfortably. "I have a somewhat distressed former CEO here who believes he is meeting with you in 45 minutes to sell stolen Hale assets." A deep, rumbling laugh echoed from the device, sending a shockwave of ice straight through Dominic's chest. "Tell Dominic Smith he is a profound idiot." "Celine Hale called me at 2 in the morning. She offered my firm a highly lucrative, entirely legal partnership on the new London shipping contracts. My only condition for the deal was blacklisting the Smith family from every boardroom, bank, and country club on the eastern seaboard. Tell the boy to plug in his little hard drive and see what he actually downloaded." The line clicked dead. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by Dominic's ragged, shallow breathing. His hands shook violently as he grabbed his laptop, flipped it open, and jammed the encrypted hard drive into the port. He frantically clicked on the main folder labeled Hudson_Yards_proprietary. The screen flickered. Instead of spreadsheets or architectural blueprints, a single window popped up. It was a black screen with a looping video of a digital clock ticking down to 0. Beneath the clock, an automated text box appeared. "Critical error. Data wiped. IP logged. NYPD Cyber Crimes Unit notified of unauthorized download attempt. Goodbye, Dominic." "She locked you out of the actual servers the moment you signed that contract last night, Dominic," Arthur said softly, all traces of amusement gone from his voice, replaced by cold, hard steel. "She anticipated your petty theft. She left a honeypot on the local server, a fake file designed to track exactly who tried to steal it. You didn't just lose your company last night. You just committed a federal felony, attempting to steal corporate secrets that now legally belong to the Hale Investment Group." "No," Dominic whispered, falling backward into his leather executive chair. No. She can't do this. I'm Dominic Smith. I own this city." "You own nothing," a new voice interrupted. The door to the study swung open. 2 men in plain clothes, wearing NYPD detective badges around their necks, stepped into the room. "Dominic Smith?" the lead detective asked, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "I'm Detective Gallagher, White Collar Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Dominic didn't fight. He couldn't. The reality of his absolute, inescapable ruin finally crushed the last pathetic remnants of his ego. As the cold steel snapped shut around his wrists, he was dragged out of his own study, past the weeping frame of his mother, who was being shoved into the freight elevator, and out of the elite world forever. An hour later, the penthouse was entirely cleared. The noise of the packing, the shouting, and the police had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, echoing silence. Celine stood on the sweeping terrace, the biting November wind whipping her sleek cashmere coat around her legs. She looked down at the sprawling city below. This balcony was where Dominic used to stand, drinking expensive scotch and mocking the ants on the pavement. Now he was one of them. Arthur stepped out onto the terrace, handing her a steaming cup of black coffee. "They are gone, Celine," Arthur said quietly. "Bail has been denied for Dominic, given the flight risk. Beatrice is currently attempting to check into the Waldorf Astoria with a suspended credit card." Celine took a sip of the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. She didn't smile. There was no chaotic joy in witnessing pathetic people destroy themselves, only a profound, settling sense of closure. "Arthur, contact the legal department," Celine instructed, turning her back on the view and looking at the opulent, soulless living room. "I want this entire property gutted. Strip the marble, tear down the glass. We are transferring the deed to the Lillian Hale Foundation. We are converting the Smith penthouse into a fully funded, high-security transitional headquarters for women fleeing domestic and financial abuse. Let the Grand Foyer become a legal aid clinic." Arthur's eyes widened slightly, a genuine, deep respect softening his sharp features. "An exceptional directive, Miss Hale. Your grandfather would be utterly baffled by the lack of profit." "My grandfather is dead," Celine said, stepping back into the warmth of the penthouse. "But my mother would be extraordinarily proud. Call the contractors, Arthur. We have a lot of rebuilding to do." 8 months after the brutal eviction at the Smith penthouse, the crisp, unforgiving winds of autumn whipped through Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. Inside the grand oak-paneled walls of the Federal District Court, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters from Bloomberg, the New York Post, and Forbes, all waiting with bated breath for the climax of the trial of the decade. Dominic Smith sat at the defense table. The man who had once graced the cover of GQ as New York's most eligible real estate bachelor was unrecognizable. The bespoke Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a standard-issue, ill-fitting grey suit provided by his public defender. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and darting nervously around the room. He had aged 10 years in 8 months. Sitting in the third row of the gallery was his mother, Beatrice. She wore a faded beige trench coat, a desperate, pathetic attempt to look dignified, though the fraying cuffs betrayed her reality. Following the immediate freezing of her assets, Beatrice had been evicted from the Waldorf Astoria and was currently residing in a cramped, one-bedroom walk-up in Astoria, Queens, surviving entirely on Social Security and the charity of a few pitying, distant cousins. At the back of the courtroom, completely unnoticed by the media circus, stood Celine Hale. She wore a sharp, understated black blazer and dark sunglasses, blending perfectly into the shadows near the heavy wooden doors. Beside her stood Arthur Pendleton, leaning stoically on his silver-tipped cane. They had not come to gloat. They had come to witness the closing of a ledger. Judge Harrison Caldwell, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on white-collar crime, adjusted his glasses and looked down from the bench with absolute disgust. "Dominic Smith," Judge Caldwell's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing off the marble floors. "You have been found guilty on 3 counts of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You attempted to steal proprietary algorithms and trade secrets to salvage an empire built on deceit and over-leveraged debt. Your arrogance is exceeded only by your absolute disregard for the law." Dominic squeezed his eyes shut, his hands trembling violently on the table. "I hereby sentence you to 84 months in federal prison at the Allenwood Low Security Correctional Institution, without the possibility of early parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Court is adjourned." The bang of the gavel sounded like a gunshot. Beatrice let out a piercing, hysterical wail, collapsing against the wooden pew. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light as federal marshals immediately flanked Dominic, hauling him to his feet and cuffing his hands behind his back. Celine watched him being led away through the side door. He briefly caught her eye through the crowd. In that fleeting second, Celine saw the absolute, crushing realization in his gaze. The mousy, terrified girl he had thrown into the freezing rain had become the architect of his total destruction. Celine didn't smile. She simply turned her back on him and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the ruins of the Smith family behind her. 2 hours later, Celine sat at the head of a massive, polished obsidian table in the boardroom of the newly minted Hale Tower, formerly the Smith Enterprises headquarters. The panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline served as a backdrop to the empire she now ruthlessly controlled. "The transition is complete, Miss Hale," Arthur stated, distributing heavily redacted dossiers to the 5 senior executives seated at the table. "The Hudson Yards development has been fully restructured. We have successfully pivoted away from vacant luxury condos. The new blueprints prioritize high-yield commercial leasing for tech startups, integrated with a massive 30% allocation for subsidized, affordable housing. The press is calling it the most progressive real estate maneuver in New York history." Celine nodded slowly, steepling her fingers. "And what of the Carmichael family?" Arthur's lips twitched into a predatory smirk. "Ah, they took the bait perfectly." The heavy boardroom doors swung open. 2 security guards escorted a visibly furious, red-faced Richard Carmichael and his daughter, Sylvia, into the room. Sylvia, who had once sneered at Celine over a glass of Pinot Noir, now looked thoroughly panicked, her designer dress failing to hide her trembling posture. "What is the meaning of this, Celine?" Richard bellowed, slamming his hands on the table. "You summoned us here like common employees. You may have destroyed Dominic, but Carmichael Industries is legacy money. You cannot touch us." "Sit down, Richard," Celine commanded. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it possessed a gravitational pull that forced the older man into a leather chair. Sylvia sank into the seat beside him, refusing to meet Celine's eyes. Celine slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth obsidian surface. "Legacy money is notoriously fragile when it's poorly managed," Celine said, leaning forward. "For the past 3 months, you, Richard, have been quietly attempting to short Hale investment stock through offshore proxy firms, hoping the Hudson Yards pivot would fail. You thought you could bankrupt me in the shadows to avenge your daughter's bruised ego." Richard paled, staring at the paper. It was a comprehensive ledger of every illegal proxy trade he had authorized. "You see," Celine continued, her eyes locking onto Sylvia's terrified face, "while you were busy plotting a hostile short sell, I was busy buying up the Carmichael family's collateralized debt obligations. Every loan you took out to maintain your old money facade, your estates in the Hamptons, the yachts, the private jets, I own it." Sylvia gasped, clutching her father's arm. "Dad, is she telling the truth?" "As of noon today," Celine said, her voice turning to ice, "I initiated a margin call. You owe the Hale Group $300 million, payable within 48 hours. If you fail to produce the liquid cash, which I know for a fact you do not have, I will liquidate Carmichael Industries and seize your personal assets." You're a monster," Sylvia choked out, tears of genuine terror spilling over her mascara. "I am a businesswoman," Celine corrected smoothly, echoing Sylvia's own cruel words from the day of the divorce. "You understand business, don't you, Sylvia? Oh, wait. No, you don't." Celine stood up, towering over them with terrifying authority. "I will give you a one-time offer. transfer your remaining operational shipping ports to the Hale Group by midnight, and I will forgive the debt. You keep your houses, but Carmichael Industries ceases to exist. Refuse, and you'll be sharing a walk-up apartment with Beatrice Smith by Friday. The choice is yours. Get out of my building. The following week, the Manhattan skyline felt different to Celine. It no longer felt like a cage of towering glass and steel meant to intimidate her. It felt like a chessboard she had definitively conquered. Celine bypassed her town car and decided to walk the final few blocks to her destination. She wore a simple, elegant trench coat, blending in with the bustling New York crowds. She walked into the lobby of the Smith Tower, a building she had once been thrown out of with exactly $85 to her name. The space was unrecognizable. The opulent, intimidating grand foyer had been entirely gutted. The dark marble had been replaced with warm, inviting oak and bright, natural light. Above the reception desk, bold silver letters read, "The Lillian Hale Foundation for Women." Celine walked past the reception area, watching as a team of top-tier pro bono lawyers sat with women who looked exactly like she had a year ago, terrified, exhausted, but seeking a lifeline. The penthouse suite upstairs, where she had endured 5 years of emotional torment, was now a high-security, luxury transitional sanctuary for women escaping financial and domestic abuse. She walked back outside, breathing in the crisp air. She made her way to a secluded cemetery on the outskirts of the city, walking down a quiet path lined with weeping willows. She stopped before a modest, elegant headstone. Lillian Hale, beloved mother. She chose peace. Celine knelt, placing a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone. "I did it, Mum," Celine whispered, touching the cool granite. "I opened the box. I took the Empire back. But I didn't let their darkness turn me into one of them. I built a fortress." A soft breeze rustled the willow branches overhead. Celine closed her eyes, letting the profound serenity of the moment wash over her. She had been ground into the pavement by the very people who claimed to be untouchable. But she hadn't stayed down. She had descended into the ashes, forged herself in the fires of their betrayal, and returned to reign. She was Celine Hale, and the city, finally, was exactly what she wanted it to be. She left with nothing after the divorce, but returned, as the city's hidden heiress, stands as a gripping testament to the enduring power of resilience and the absolute necessity of reclaiming one's narrative. Celine's evolution from a discarded, emotionally battered wife into a formidable, strategic visionary highlights the central theme that true strength is forged in the crucible of profound adversity. By systematically dismantling the corrupt empires of Dominic Smith and the Carmichael family, the narrative satisfyingly subverts the traditional power dynamics of elite society. However, Celine's ultimate victory is not defined by her staggering financial domination, but by her transformative philanthropy, turning the very site of her trauma into a sanctuary for others. This grounds the drama in genuine emotional reality, proving that the most lethal revenge against cruelty is building an empire of unshakable compassion.